Hi guys, this presentation is a how to write an answer to a 10-mark question, and I've based this on one of your practice sacks which we gave you for holiday homework. I will go over generally how to tackle a 10-mark question, and then we will look at a model question and how to break it down and how to answer it. So the first step, whether you're doing a SAC, an exam, or even just a practice go, or even a textbook question, you should tackle it firstly this way. Break down the question or unpack the question. So how do we unpack the question? First, we're going to identify, what task words are being used. So there could be one or there could be actually two task words in a 10-mark question. A task word can be a verb or it can be a command word, and they generally range from lower order thinking all the way to higher order thinking. For a 10-mark question, you will most likely get a higher order thinking command word. And generally the most popular is discuss or evaluate, and they're very similar in their structure. The next thing you should do under step 1 is find the content words. They are just topics that we have covered. Sometimes in end of year exams, the topics could be over units 3 and 4. The next thing to look out for is limiting or focus words. So you're looking at obviously a topic, so it could be enterprise, agreements, and then you're looking at, what limiting words or focus words. So what do you need to discuss or evaluate exactly? Sometimes a limiting word can be a number, so 1 or 2. Focus words could be really anything, but it's what you need to hone on in when you are looking at the topic. So this is an example. This one came from the CPAP practice sack that we gave you for holiday homework. So worth 10 marks, obviously. So in your end of year exam, you'll probably have about 16 minutes to write your 10-mark question. Well, that's the time that should be allocated to it. That does not mean that you need to spend exactly 16 minutes on it, but the rule of thumb is if you are going over 16 minutes, stop and come back to it, because you will waste time on other questions. It's very important that you answer as many questions as possible. Never leave an answer blank, and blank answer is an automatic 0. So let's read over the question. Discuss the use of enterprise agreements as a method of determining wages and conditions of work. Explain the role of unions and the Fair Work Commission during the process of negotiating enterprise agreements. In your response, refer to a contemporary business case study. So contemporary business case studies are important. It cannot be older really, or any issue cannot be older than 4 years old. So contemporary means current. So let's find the task words. I will put those task words in yellow. So as we see here, we've got the word discuss and the word explain and refer. So there's actually 3 task words for this answer. And like I said, it's very common for a 10-mark question. Let's locate the content words. I'll put them in green. I like to think of content words and obviously limiting or focus words as a cause and effect. So the topic words will be the effect, and the cause will be the content words. So content words are enterprise agreements. So that's what you're going to be talking about. As well, with the next sentence, we'll be looking at unions and the Fair Work Commission. So that's the knowledge that you're going to be tested on. I should also note a 10-mark question is generally looking at how you can apply the knowledge that you've learnt. It's not something you can learn, rote learn, or memorize. It is a skill, so you can't just rely on just memorizing content. Now the limiting and focus words, which is the effect, so the cause being the content. Alright, so let's find the focus or limiting words. So with the first one, so the enterprise agreements, but you're going to focus on determining wages and conditions. With the next part, so the role of unions and the Fair Work Commission during the process of negotiating enterprise agreements. So you're going to be focusing on what the role the unions and Fair Work Commission have solely on negotiating enterprise agreements. So I wouldn't talk about things like resolving disputes or grievances. And lastly, the contemporary business case study is going to also be your focus. because your answer should have in there how so the enterprise agreements, unions and Fair Work Commissions, and looking at them solely focusing on a contemporary business case study, no older than 4 years. I should also point out, when you see the word role, you're looking at what organisation or a thing or a person does. So it's what they do, not who they are. Alright, so next step is plan your response. So obviously in a practice SAC or looking at your textbook questions, you can have time to plan for it. But in an exam or a SAC when you're under time conditions, your plan should be very, very simple. So even just writing things like paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4, and a couple of words next to it. So where you can plan your response, obviously you can use the pages at the back of your exam booklets. Remember, your exam is scanned and there are boxes around the writing that says do not write out of this area. So don't use the blank pages or ask for another booklet. In your SACs, you can write it underneath or atop of the question. So looking at the question, obviously, I've split it up into 4 paragraphs. Use paragraphs in your extended responses. They make them a lot easier to read. They are a bit more coherent, and that way, as a marker, as your teacher, it'll be a lot easier for me to read. When an answer is a lot easier to read, we are probably a little bit more generous when it comes to marks. Alright, so paragraph 1, because it is a discuss, you're looking at strengths and weaknesses. So I'm going to do 1 strength of enterprise agreements, and then I can do another paragraph actually. 1 corresponding, so they need to match. So whatever strength I have, so strength and weakness, need to match. So the next paragraph, I'm going to explain the role of unions. The following paragraph, I'll explain the role of the Fair Work Commission. And then lastly, my contemporary case study. Should be no older than 4 years. So it doesn't mean you can't use a business that is, 100 years old or 50 years old, whatever. But the issue you're talking about, or the enterprise agreements, or the unions you're talking about, any issues have to be no older than 4 years. And you need to make reference to unions and Fair Work Commissions and how they obviously influence the role or influence the negotiation of enterprise agreements. So let's recap some of the content. So enterprise agreements, remember, are collective agreements between an employer and the employees at a workplace, where they negotiate together and set out the terms and conditions of employment. So remember, these are different from a modern award that is set by the government. And remember, any enterprise agreements cannot have terms and conditions less than the NES, so the National Employment Standards. So remember, you can either be on an enterprise agreement or a collective agreement, or alternatively an award, so an industry-wide award, or an individual contract. They're the only 3 that you can have. Now obviously the participants in workplace relations, we're focusing just on the unions and the Fair Work Commission. So unions are an organisation formed to represent and protect rights of workers in a particular industry. Particularly, and one of their roles obviously is to negotiate enterprise agreements. The Fair Work Commission is Australia's national workplace relations tribunal. So its role is to assist employees and employers to maintain productive workplaces. So they deal with grievances as well. They are an independent body. So one of the roles of the Fair Work Commission when it comes to enterprise agreements is to assess and approve them. So any time between the unions who are representing the employees, after they've negotiated with the employer, have come to an agreement, the Fair Work Commission must assess and approve that enterprise agreement. And generally the Fair Work Commission will approve it because the enterprise agreement needs to be tailored towards the particular needs of enterprises as well. And the agreement must leave an employee better off overall when compared to the relevant award or awards. So contemporary example. So this is contemporary example number 1. Obviously we know about the coronavirus or COVID-19. So obviously that is a contemporary example that you can use. There's lots of articles and lots of examples when it comes to businesses dealing with the coronavirus. So I found an article on Qantas particularly with their enterprise agreements and issues after they've had to stand down 30,000 staff due to COVID-19. And I'll put the link up on Teams for you. So this is one example we can use, and I'll go over briefly what the article is about. So I've taken some screenshots from the article. So it is focused on Qantas and Jetstar because they've had to temporarily stand down 2/3 of their employees, obviously because of the coronavirus pandemic. The decision, according to the workplace relations law professor, could be taken by other businesses. So you've probably seen in the news a lot of other businesses had to stand down or put their employees temporarily out of work. And this could be for any type of employment. So under the Fair Work Act, so this is important, remember enterprise agreements cannot be less than NES or go or contravene or contradict the Fair Work Act. So under the Fair Work Act, any employee, whether full-time, part-time or casual, can be stood down without pay if they can't do useful work. So an employer is not expected to keep their employees and pay them if there's no work for them to do. The business is shut down or gone into hibernation. Because of equipment breakdown, industrial action or stoppage of work, which the employer can reasonably be held responsible. So if we look down here further, how does it work? So obviously the Fair Work Act provides provisions on stand-down agreements, but they don't deal with every situation. So I'm pretty sure if you look at any agreement or any act, there's probably nothing about the coronavirus itself. So in this article, the professor advises that anyone should check their enterprise agreement. And I'll show you the education enterprise agreement in a moment. So he says here, much larger businesses will have agreements in place. So you need to consult with staff and the union. So this is the role of the union. So obviously the union has negotiated with the employer this condition in their enterprise agreement. So with Qantas, they have about 50 enterprise agreements because they hire such different people and for different roles. So just to repeat, Qantas have 50 enterprise agreements and have to stand down staff because they're not operating. They don't have any business or hardly any business. Their union is the ASU, the Australian Services Union. But in this situation, the union's role would be to try and uphold as many conditions of that enterprise agreement. So the union should be negotiating with the employer, particularly Qantas as well, when it comes to standing down employees. What entitlements do they have? Can they use their sick leave, their holiday annual leave, or their long service leave? So as you see here. So employees still being paid. Alright, so another example for you that you can use, still the coronavirus issue, is obviously the Victorian Government Schools Agreement, which teachers, principals and teachers' aides are on, and the office staff. So teachers have the AEU as their union, and of course the Victorian Government, so the Department of Education and Training, is our employer. So this is for government schools only. So I'm going to show you a condition in the Victorian Government Schools Agreement which was negotiated when it comes to the coronavirus. So under section 14C, there's actually a condition in our enterprise agreement when it comes to infectious diseases. So obviously this is what 14C says. If an employee's duties expose him or her to the risk of contracting an infectious disease like COVID-19, an employee is unable to attend work, the employee may be granted leave with full pay without deduction of personal leave. So last term, when Dan Andrews decided to call the school holidays early, we were still paid and none of our leave was taken off us. So the role of the unions in this, remember the unions are the ones that negotiated on the teachers' behalf. They've advocated directly with the government, who was our employer, on behalf of members, raising your concerns. And the concerns of teachers were, themselves contracting the virus and spreading it to their students or family members. So with the Fair Work Commission, obviously during the negotiation of that enterprise agreement, they had to approve this term condition of our agreement. So going back to the answer, how long should it be? It should be 2 pages in length. So if you look at the past exams, the 10-mark question is usually about 2 pages, 50 lines. So review the past exams. It is the longest question in the exam. as well. Obviously, we've gone over this. Make sure you address the question that it's asking you. Many students will read the question, not break it down, not unpack it, and just write an answer that they have memorized from doing practice Sax or just reviewing their notes. That's why it's important to look at the limiting and focus words. How you do that is you show the cause and effect. So use these causal verbs here, hence as a result to link your answer back to the prompt. So just like in English, when you get an essay question, they're going to ask you about the text that you are currently studying, but they're going to ask you to focus on certain things. So it could be a topic or a character, or an issue. So you constantly need to go back to the prompt. So your answers should, and the way you actually approach these 10-mark questions, or any question, should be exactly the same. Read the question carefully. Your answer needs to be concise, so don't ramble. You have 2 pages. But it also needs to have depth. I know it sounds contradictory, but how you do that is use teal, like back in English, or peel. So have your topic or your point, explain your topic, and then give evidence or a fact. That's how you give depth to your answer. And then obviously, like I said, link it back to the prompt. Do the cause and effect. Use your causal verbs and use a variety of them. So looking at paragraph 1. So firstly, start off with what we call a cohesive conjunction. Your paragraph should be started this way because it'll flow better. So a cohesive conjunction, so cohesive obviously means sticking together, and a conjunction is a joining word. So you start off with the strength. So what a strength of an enterprise agreement is. So then expand on your answer. Explain what it is, what it looks like. Maybe go into a fact that has to be approved by the Fair Work Commission. That way you're linking almost to the other part of the question. And then obviously back to the link needs to go back to your answer. So the enterprise agreement and their effect on wage and conditions. So this is your focus. So going back to your focus, linking it back. So using that causal verb, so the effect an enterprise agreement has on wages and conditions, which is pretty simple. An enterprise agreement will list pay and conditions for employees who are a part of that enterprise agreement. Then you need to have your weakness. Now this is a signpost. A signpost tells the person reading your piece that you are changing direction. Think of it when you drive in the car. How you know what the speed limit is? There will be a signpost. And you will do exactly the same thing. You will explain, expand on your topic or your point, and then give some evidence, so a fact as well. Make sure it corresponds. So whatever the strength is, there's going to be a matching weakness. And then once again, using your causal verb and linking back to the focus. That way you're actually answering the question. You will not get full marks if you don't answer the question properly. We do not want to see a shopping list of facts. This is a higher order thinking question, which means you need to apply your knowledge. It is a skill you'll need to practice. Next paragraph, here's your cohesive conjunction, furthermore. Or you can say secondly. The main role of unions is expand on it, maybe do some facts, maybe talk about maybe the AEU or the Qantas one. So the Qantas one is the Australian Services Union. And then once again, link back to your question. So using your causal verb. So hence, thus, as a result, I've given you guys a list, and link back to the focus or the limiting words. So we were looking at the process of negotiation of enterprise agreements. Paragraph 3 is essentially the same as paragraph 2, except you are focusing on the role of the Fair Work Commission. Once again, your explanation, so explain further in more detail your previous sentence, like in an English essay, and then obviously with the piece of evidence or fact, and then the causal verb, which is your link back the role of the Fair Work Commission in the process of negotiating what an enterprise agreement is. Alright, so paragraph 4, this is where you can use the reference to the contemporary case study with some of the points you've mentioned in previous paragraphs. So obviously an example, a contemporary business case study, so you can do all the Qantas. But obviously the contemporary will be Your explanation will be about the COVID-19 pandemic and how businesses have had to shut down. Then you'll be talking about the role of the union, fighting on behalf of employees at risk of job. This is sort of going back to the enterprise agreement that they have negotiated previously. So upholding those conditions of that enterprise agreement. So job losses or accessing sick leave or pay. So the link could be the unions negotiated on behalf of those employees to ensure those entitlements were relevant in the enterprise agreement and the Fair Work Commission approved them. So the Fair Work Commission could also be used to resolve disputes via arbitration, particularly if that employer is not upholding that enterprise agreement. Now, a quick little recap. I haven't actually written out a model answer for this because I want you to do it on your own, because I don't want you to rote learn or memorize an answer that a teacher has written. In the future, I will be giving you model texts. But to recap, break down and unpack the question. Look for the task words. Look for the limiting words or the focus words, and look for the content words. Do a mini plan, a couple of dot points, so you know what you need to write. Follow Teal or Peel for depth, so making sure you expand on any of your points. Give facts as well, and then link it back to, use your cause and effect, so your causal verbs, and link back to the focus. So link these two together as a cause and effect. Use paragraphs, use spaces in your answers. You can get extra paper if you need it. Use signposts. So however, whereas, on the other hand. Use linking words, use those cohesive conjunctions. Firstly, furthermore, finally. And be concise. You will be under time conditions in your exams and SACs. So concise means directly answering the question. So I hope this helps you. Thank you so much for listening.